Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming here. This is the last hour of the art fair, so it's very good of you to spend in conversation rather than catching the last students of the art that's going to spend the time. I'm very honored to have two old friends, Ray and art historians and art practitioners in Hong Kong. Among expatriate scholars and artists, they probably can claim to have a real knowledge of Asia, Hong Kong, as well as the international scene. I'd like to introduce Frank Vigneron next to me. He's an artist and a theoretician and art historian. And his teaching is mainly focused on European art history, but in his practice as a curator of art production, he has done work that deals with Chinese literary art. So it is as a practitioner and theoretician that we hope you will enlighten us today. And then at the other side is David Clarke. David has been in Hong Kong also for a very long time. He has written books on Hong Kong art. So Hong Kong art as a modern art history is something which is very nebulous, difficult to grasp. For a long time it was invisible. So how do you see art and how to place art, which for a long time has been invisible, and now suddenly finds itself caught in this maelstrom of artistic activity, Chinese and international. It is a very interesting thing. So David is probably more equipped to speak to us about this than anybody else. He's also an artist, photographer who has exhibited quite a few times. And so he is also a practitioner who can look at art from the inside. So welcome to Frank Vigneron and David Clarke. Thank you. Since we proposed this sort of like a word play, I am Chang Tsong-zung, and I thought I would have a name of the venue. I have an exhibition upstairs. I run the High Art TZ Gallery. And if you go up there, you see a very big landscape painting. That is the artist who were exhibiting in our booth. I have also been in Hong Kong quite a long time, and last year we held the 30th anniversary show in which we had a big conference, an international conference on the thesis, which has to do with art history. But that particular project was to put art history in the context of Chinese political and cultural history. The question that was being asked is, how do we look at Chinese modernity? And what does art tell us about Chinese modernity as a whole? So it was a project that framed art in the context of what we call the three parallel art worlds, namely the socialist world, the global capitalist world, and the world of the traditional literary art. This is intended to reflect not just art practices, but also the political and cultural realities of China. China had this very special situation in which, for quite a long time, I would say even until today, China has sat on both sides of the divide of the Cold War. It was particularly evident in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and now things have changed a little bit. But there are a lot of characteristics that feature three different art worlds that's happening in parallel. So the three parallel art worlds try to do this thing, and the question that we pose to people today: what does an art work? How does an art work go to work? So this is an example that we could use. We could use the three parallel art worlds framework to discuss. And this topic is only slightly pertinent for us in Hong Kong, for us in our field, because this book that we worked on for the last year, which includes this conference January last year, was just published, and she editor was working with painstakingly for a whole year. It's Stanley Girl, she's on the front row. So thank you. And the one example perhaps I should start with this conversation with is this. If we look at the socialist art world and the capitalist art world, and of course the literary art world, what does we notice that the artwork, what we call the artwork, in these three worlds, in fact, behave very differently. The most important thing is not what happens within the art world, but what happens, what these artworks do to the world outside the art circle, within their own realms. For example, we all seem to know what an artwork does in the capitalist global art world. So we have this on the outside, which is one thing that the way it goes to work, is that it goes to work as a commodity. It is being exchanged, it's being looked at. But here it also works as an object of inquiry. We're here because we're curious about it. But what does an artwork do to society at large to other art worlds? Firstly, maybe there's something which goes distant from us here, is the socialist art world. In the socialist art world, there's no art market. So the market does not play a role, but government plays a very big role. And artwork is part of the whole ideological mechanism of the state. And if we ask what it does, it certainly becomes very important as part of the ideological makeup in the function that it defines what the society attempts to do for the future. In the socialist country, in artwork basically outlines for us the shape and form of the society to come, the future to happen. Whereas in a very simple example is that in the 70s, 60s, 70s in China, if you go to China, every object you see, most daily utensils you use, will have the sayings of the chairman printed on it. They will be icons of the state in all practical daily objects. They may not be artworks as we call it, but they certainly a form of art. And what they do is that they actually try to function outside of art circle. They try to transform the world outside of art circle. They try to tell you how to change your life, how society should go forward, and go away from what it is. It is not satisfied with just looking at what happens coming out here or reflecting on existing situations. If you look at the global capitalist art world, we find another very strange thing which will not happen in the socialist art world, which is you can take an everyday object, an ordinary thing, and you take it into the art sphere, put it in a museum, and it is endorsed by an artist. It's an artwork. So the way the capitalist global art world functions in this case is, in a way, tries to make sense for us, or try to expand the meaning of art within the world we're in. For example, I saw some paintings by Michael Clarke, one very famous work made in the 70s. That particular work, he put a glass of water in the hall. That was artwork, and he has questions, and it basically questions the everyday thing and how it actually can become an artwork in this space. And it provokes us to relook at our own predicament. Whereas in the literati art world, the artwork has something very, very strange. Because in Chinese literati art, what is called fine art always has to do with the written word. Calligraphy, painting, but painting, aesthetic decisions are often made on its brushwork. So, reflecting its relation to calligraphy writing. There's also seal carving, which is essentially art carving written word as well. And these are the principal fine art in the literati art world. But what it has to do with the world outside the art sphere is interesting, because what it does is it takes something that people use every day as a practical tool, especially the tool used by class of people who are in political and cultural power. And it elevates this tool, what they do every day, and turns it and makes it available as a source for making art, making something which is verified in art. So in these three words, apparently what the artwork does to the world outside, to the circle outside it, what is enshrined by either the art platform or the exhibition hall or the Salon circles, they function differently. So with this example, with this preview, I hope to ask my friends here to enlighten us to.
Can I just ask for a clarification about your terminology? You explained that you talk about artworks, which we often do, and the idea of artwork is already the idea that this art thing is a very active thing. It's not a passive thing in the transaction. But on the subtitle of your book, you use a slightly different terminology. You say art things. Are they interchangeable terms, or you have a slightly different association?
We are not in the habit of talking about artwork. This is why it is possible to pun on this word, how art goes to work. But of course, it also reflects on other implications of the concept of what art does in the modern world. The fact that we use the word art production, we call art practices. These are words very much imbued with implications of Marxist terminology and those terminology of economic production. And so it already makes implications of what this art object does. And by calling things art things, I'm actually trying to differentiate between things which are considered art in one of these three worlds, may not be considered art in the other world. Like the Craig Martin's glass of water needed the exhibition hall to work, and it would certainly not work within the socialist world. But in reverse, a lot of propaganda art today will say, oh, this is just propaganda, it's not art. But in the socialist world, they are art because they function as part of the machinery of creating a visual realization of a vision of the society.
All right. So, in fact, I'd rather start with the people making these things, because their function and what they're doing, what they're doing is being represented by these different cultures. In fact, has a direct impact on how these things are perceived. And I'll start with the older bit, the literati artist. First, we should remember that even words like art and artist are not exactly or not at all the same. In the past, we don't, yizhu, the Chinese word for art, it's a 20th century invention that basically comes from Japan, in fact. Before that, you have painters, calligraphers, and poets in China. And in the context of literati painting, where there is, as you said, but also like socialist part, but differently, there's no real art market. Literati make art basically for each other, which also explains, for instance, why the art theory produced by the literati it looks like it doesn't change for very long periods of time, because they're all based on the same Neo-Confucian philosophy. So it's literati painters painting for each other, talking to each other, and in this context, there is no real implications of money. You don't, works gets exchanged, you don't buy them. Although, by the 18th century, things like this change profoundly, but one thing that sort of blurred our vision of that particular system of exchange of artwork is that normally literati artists and professional artists are not supposed to belong to the same world. And by the 18th century, the limits between literati and professional gets more and more blurred. And although artists start to sell stuff, they will not admit it. So if you read the art theory, for instance, they're still talking about the high moral requirements, the ethical dimension of making art, and it's not supposed to be about money or anything like this. So you have this rather complex history of the high art of the literati, which has nothing to do with the fetishism of commodity, as Marx would put it. And in many ways, this comes with, of course, a very elitist understanding and approach of what art is. And when the communist regime comes to be, this elitism of literary art is, of course, violently rejected. And the one thing that, in a sense, doesn't change is that there is no money, there is no market in the socialist world, but you still have artists. And the role, the identity of the artist in communist China, at least for the first, from the 1950s to the 1960s, and I guess up until the 70s, is that they are under suspicion because they are always being attacked by the government, because they are not supposed to be the individual artists that the literary painters used to be. So they are asked to work in group. They were, the example of the artist village, for instance. Michael Sutton wrote interesting pages about this, that in the artist village, the peasants are supposed to be the artists, so you don't have word and so on. The reality is that you had a lot of professional artists who were already professional artists before 1949, sent to the villages to work with the peasants. And in fact, in the end, only the real artists made the work that was identified by the state as peasant art. And you have, I always was fascinated by, in the 1970s in Europe, you have a lot of Maoists. People who believe in the revolution, who think that Mao Zedong is the bomb, it's wonderful. And you have this French artist called Gérard Fromager.
I almost bought a Mao jacket in Camden Market in London, but it was a bit too expensive.
My dad, I was born in Hong Kong, my parents were working here, and he had the entire paraphernalia. He could dress as a Mao soldier if he wanted to. This vanished, unfortunately. And where was I? Sorry. I lost it. The Maoists in Europe, Gérard Fromager, that's right, who gets invited by the Chinese Communist Party to come to China, and he made a portrait of the most famous of these peasant artists. And I always thought it was fascinating because, in spite of the very Maoist frame of mind of this French artist and China as it were then, he was still making a portrait of an artist. Even though the artist, the peasant artist, was not supposed to be identified as an artist. You also have a very complex set of relationships that create a very different idea of what artists are and what they're doing. So, yes.
Can you elucidate a little bit? This French artist made this work in China.
Well, he went to China, took photos, and when he came back and
this work, where was it exhibited? Who did he make this work for?
Oh, well,
did he make it for the
exactly, for the European market, of course. But in those days, in Europe, it was also the time, for instance, when Jean-Luc Godard stops making films in his own name. He works together with his friends. They call themselves the Gigavertov group from the Russian movie maker. And it's interesting because when you look at the films of Godard made at that time were very communist, very Maoist, and so on. They're still pure Jean-Luc Godard movies. So no matter what the political context is, you cannot escape the identity of the artist. And I'm tempted to say that the only reason why everybody's paying so much money to buy art in a place like Art Basel is because, in spite of the art education we tend to provide today, which is more about social engagement and stuff like this, we are still basing the art market today on the notion that art is made by special people who are the artists. Because if it's not made by special people, if anyone can do it, why pay so much money? So it's very interesting to see that no matter what the intellectual background of a period is, you always, no matter if you want to fight against the notion of the special person as the artist, it always comes back. Sometimes in a hidden way.
You could say that even during the the Maoist period, artists had their own power in a way, that the state couldn't just use tanks and guns, they needed to use ideology to keep people in place, and they needed specialists in the promotion of ideology to do that, and therefore artists did have some power to some extent. So I'd like to question in a way whether we can really even talk about Maoist art as socialist art, for two reasons. One is I don't see Maoism, I see Maoism or Stalinism and Leninism even already earlier in the century as a sort of betrayal of socialism. It's just some totalitarianism or something you want to call it. That's a kind of sort of radical critique. So first of all, I don't think it was really socialist art. Sometimes the theme is socialist, but in the Cultural Revolution, a lot of the time the theme is about hierarchy. It's about Mao as a sort of quasi-imperial benefactor who makes everything right, and that's completely anti-socialist, actually presented as socialism. Although I find a lot of that art a little bit boring, I am interested in the way that in that time art was taken into radically new contexts, and Johnson mentioned that. So art would be found being paraded in the street, it would be found in the home, yeah, that's interesting. And there are sort of parallels to of course, one always wants to, once someone puts down a theory, you always want to think of the exception. So I think there's some sort of parallels between the sort of performative use of art in the Maoist era, or the performative use of symbols, like Mao swimming in the Yangtze, as a kind of performance art in a way. I mean, and a lot of the way Chinese performance art, Xingwei Yishu, has developed, it has a sort of flavor that it's hard to imagine without public activities that took place during the Cultural Revolution or the whole Maoist period. There's a certain kind of severity, extremity of it seems to owe to that. And another way in which I would say, to cut down the notion of whether that art is socialist, is that I do find a lot of very interesting art made in that period by ink painters. Somehow there's something about the medium of ink painting that allowed a degree of resistance from Maoist ideology, because there's something in the use of the brush that innately is expressive and individualistic, partly because it's for many hundreds of years it had been used in that way. Even if the state wanted the people to not be individualistic, and even if the artists were trying their best to be obedient, nevertheless, many wonderful artworks were made by ink painters. Not so much by oil painters, I have to say. They seem to embody the state ideology much more directly, but Fu Baoshi, for instance, is someone I love, who made great works, in my opinion, during that period.
This Mao swimming the Yangtze as a performer art, I think, is a brilliant idea, and also illustrates all activities and all cultural gestures have an ideological purpose. And perhaps this is really what ties together all these different artists who either have individual expression or not have individual expression. They are all reflecting. They are also tied to this one vision of history, which is the great future that they will realize.
So I would like to see the ink painting is sort of there within so-called socialist society. So to some extent, the interesting things in modern Chinese art to me happen when those separate distinctions of the art world start to break down, or artists try to work across the boundaries. Like a Hong Kong example, I know you like the work of Louis Chan. He's someone who is deeply aware of Western art, but sometimes he'll make a hand scroll format or a hanging scroll format. He doesn't seem to worry too much about whether it's Chinese or not. He just sort of goes ahead and just does it, you know, and it works, you know, and puts everything together.
And about the artist himself, because we've mentioned individuality by both of you, there was some discussion of the difference between the two works with these artists. The work, the socialist work or the capitalist work, respectively. In the capitalist world, like the world we're in today here, one thing that people value is the valorization of the individual, of the personality, and very often to the extreme, it is a valorization to the individual to a culture, so that the artist is a big rock star. Whereas in the socialist world, although it is the individual later on gets the individual artist who are professional, who gets identified. But in the extreme years of the Cultural Revolution, we're now trying to push through socialism from 67 to 69, in fact to 72. Artists were forbidden to use their own names. They were supposed to make works in collectives. So it is making the work that is the purpose. And they're doing it for a cause. And in this case, individuality appears to be suppressed or diversified in this group work. What do you see? Do you see this sort of activities, these group art projects, to be something that's possible for today in the art that you're working in?
Yeah, some of the experiments we're talking about was those large socialist realist oil painting. A number of them were made through committees. A lot of people coming together and deciding on absolutely every detail of the painting. But we've all worked in committee. There's always someone who speaks more loudly than someone else. So, in spite of the fact that, yes, names were suppressed and so on, we always know who would be sort of leading the pack, basically. And it's a very, very short-lived period too, but it was there. And I also think it's one of the most interesting aspects of so-called socialist realism. But there were other, for instance, why is Qi Baishu the most famous Chinese artist of the 20th century? Because he was promoted by the Communist Party, because he had all the right background. He was coming from a poor family, he was not coming from a literati family, and so on. So that's what's so interesting in the so-called socialist period, because we had all this.
I would say also he has a certain social status already that they have to negotiate with.
Exactly.
They want to have him as a little icon.
Exactly. In spite of the fact that, as you were saying, what he does is incredibly individualistic and very, very personal. This was sort of put on the back burner, basically, and ignored and not used for promotion. And once again, I get sidetracked and I forgot the question.
But this is a very interesting very interesting issue you brought up, because at the beginning of the People's Republic, these so-called art academies were set up. But they were not teaching academies. They were basically institutions created to house these established masters and to transform them as well, to make them aware of the role they should be playing in society. But what is interesting is that in the socialist world, not only are these art academies being created not for teaching, it's just for this kind of way of grouping or classifying professionals. It happened in many other types of practices. Say, now we're in a big fuss of Kunshi, the Chinese opera from Jiangsu, to be a high form of art, and it might have perished had it not been preserved by the Kunshi opera houses that the government in fact sponsored and created as social institutions at the time. So this institutional building of the socialists perhaps is something interesting to look at in comparison to institutional building of the global capitalist world, because certainly they are very different from the pre-modern, the literati world.
I would like to go back to this, the thing of artworks doing things that you started off with. I think it's important to keep both a sense of artwork as active itself and as passive, something we use to do things with, but also something that itself can do things. Like sometimes art historians who are interested in psychoanalysis, they sort of try to provide a psychoanalytic reading of an artwork, but actually an artwork doesn't have an unconscious, actually it's an object. So what is happening is the object is psychoanalyzing them in a way, it's the active part of the process. I think that it's good to keep both the sense of the active and the passive, both the sense of an artwork as a thing and a sense of an art as in the world of material things, but also an artwork as a sign or collection of signs or operating in the world of meanings. Both of those are important facts. So there's good work done, say, like by the art historian Clarke. He did very interesting work on art as a material culture. One thing that interests me, I did this book called Water and Art, which is about modern art that has subject matter or medium to do with water. And one of the things that interested me there is just water as a thing, and how you can, it's a kind of thing that's often overlooked when you talk about art. People will talk about the ink or the brush, but the paper or whatever, but they won't talk about the water which is evaporated before that art object is seen by an audience. So my interest there is on something that's at the very edge of how you can talk about things. Is water a thing? It's something ungraspable, it evaporates and disappears all the time. But I think it's also important to think of art as meaning. So as well as the physical context in which art is made, there's also the context that we as historians and interpreters bring to art. And those contexts are not, sometimes we can think of them as sort of fixed things, but I think that's wrong. We are always actively bringing context to interpret art. So maybe it's better to use a word like frame. You bring a frame to interpret art. Or if you're an old-fashioned Marxist, you think that reality is sort of fixed and you interpret art in terms of that social reality. But if you're a bit more postmodern than that, then you might think we bring our own frames of interpretation. But one interesting thing to me about the literati context is that it's something specific, it's not just a context that art is put in, but it's a context the art itself makes by being such an expressive trace of a hand of a person that when someone looks at it, they can almost see how it was made stroke by stroke, especially with calligraphy, of course. So then you have a sort of empathy with the person that made it. So it has a quality of linking across time or across, or even just between friends, but also across time, even over dynasties. You have a sense of all being part of one group. So Western oil painting with brushstrokes that you can't tell apart, many layers of paint that you can't tell what is underneath, can't do that job. So it's something. It's not so the art is actively carving out a social world. If I had to think of a Western or modern equivalent, it would be something like photography. Say a family photo album creates a family in some sense. You by sitting together, looking at your shared photos, or by sharing them electronically, as we would do nowadays, you create a sense of community. You're not just talking about a community that already existed. So your memories of your family are those photos that you have of your family.
Mm-hmm. So the reading an artwork is a very important experience in making an artwork come to life. And people who read art in very many different ways, but what David has just pointed out is intimate, close reading of art is something that is interesting. In this situation we have here outside, this is an art fair, and the galleries are very eager to engage you, so you are allowed to get very close to the art. But in a proper museum setting, you're generally not allowed to touch the art. And very often, the situation is created so that the artwork becomes almost like a sacred item, and it enhances the value of the artwork. And this is led to the fact that many artists do these intervention works, they do interactive works. But there's another situation which is very different, which is the literati world. In the literati Chinese art world, firstly, in the old days, people in the pre-war world, there was no such thing as an exhibition site for artwork to do its job. And a lot of the time, apart from reading art in the studio, it was done in the garden. And as we all know, the Chinese rock garden, which is supposed to be a piece of nature, are mostly artificial. And when you look at landscape painting in the rock garden, what it implies is that you're reading the landscape in its own context of another landscape. You're reading nature within nature, hopefully. So it highlights first the difference and this thing as the artwork. But it also brings in the other dimension of the connoisseurs engaging this literati gathering. Because very often you're asked to do something, you have to make comments. Since it's an invited audience, you might be asked to write a poem, you might be asked to add to the painting, or to do a work together as a project. Now, this type of reading and art together, reading things together, is very different from the art world of the global capitalist framework. But it is somehow close to the socialist project, although it becomes more of art is in the public space, there is more public participation, but the big difference is not a personal relation. The last two examples actually leads to another example that we're experiencing in Hong Kong now, which is like the Occupy movement.
Just about to mention that, because then there is no party telling you what to do, but people are collectively making, if you want to call it art or items of visual culture, collectively. Maybe it's just a little baby umbrella or something, but it's all meaningful in terms of the activity that you have worked together to do that, and the fact that you're giving it to other people rather than selling it or fetishizing it as a commodity.
And well, we do all know that there's a lot of video production during this Occupy movement. They start to do things, protest banners, they start to create activities between the people who are there. And it is a type of, it's a video production of art production. And how would you characterize it as from the position of an art historian?
But I think it's, art has always been involved with making communities in different ways. Like a lot of 20th century Chinese art, one way and another, not just in the Maoist years, but before, is involved in one way and another in trying to create a sense of nation. And that's, I think, although you still see artists using ink, and sometimes people call it literati style art, I don't think it's literati art because that society is already gone. But it's that art often is used to not to talk to a literati fellow community, but to talk now to a new, larger audience, a national audience, to interpolate them as being citizens of a new nation that only started in 1911, 1912 anyway. In a way, the Maoists were much more successful at doing that. It was often very much more tentative before that time. So a lot of art since has been making community, but I'm very interested, part of my interest in Hong Kong art is because Hong Kong's not a nation, so it's when you deal with Hong Kong identity in art, you're actually working against those kind of grand narratives of identity, which are usually, I think, a bit boring to me.
Making communities is a very good point. Perhaps it's about making new communities. But I do see a link to the literati gatherings. nobody really knows what these literati were talking in these private gardens. They could be talking the cool. As we all know, the Xiao Wei in Shanghai, in Vigneron, was the beginning of the revolution. So these kind of communities, whether they're engaged in affirming community which is already existing, or pushing forward for a new community, as we've been looking at the Occupy movement. If you look at it as an activity within a special space,
The Art Basel Fair will be closing in 15 minutes. 現在距離巴塞爾藝術展關門時間仲有15分鐘。The Art Basel Fair will be closing in 15 minutes.
But if you want to bring in the question of quality for a minute, I mean, although I love the making little umbrellas or whatever, but I think great art is often not just about making a community, but sort of problematizing something. There's a very famous art historical reading by T.J. Clarke of Manu's Olympia and how it was first received when it was first published. And he's talking about how it's an object that doesn't fit in the normal story about the nude, it doesn't fit in the normal story about how you would represent a prostitute in art. It actually brings them together. It's a little bit like the way the anthropologist Mary Douglas talks about all the little ways we categorize the world, but then the interesting thing is where those categories don't work. So, for example, a pangolin becomes a taboo animal because you can't quite work out what category it should go into. And that's when I think that art starts to get really, to another level.
But on a more basic level, we can say these things which are unusual, which could and could not be argued. We can only ask these questions because we have this institutional framework, which we call the art movement. We have the art platform. So between the Occupy Central students and the literati gathering in the garden, could there be some similarities between the two spaces? Because certainly the literati garden, like the Clarke Museum, is a rarefied space. When it is not being used as a family garden, when this type of activities are going on, it is slightly sanctified, and also it is slightly beyond the law. You are actually given a space which has this dimension of being not the ordinary, and perhaps we can also say the fact that these students were not immediately locked up and were allowed this period to use a public space like that. They were allowed this space for a period of time beyond the law. And so in that sense, it was comparable as an art space. And all of them were used to yours for research.
Yes, that's true. I never thought of looking at the umbrella movement as a gathering of literati, honestly. There was one of our, I don't know if it was a student, Samson Young, who was very involved in there, and there was this presentation by Oscar Ho talking about the art of the umbrella movement. And Samson was saying, this is not art, but it's debatable, of course. And he was seeing that the only reason why so much stuff was made during the umbrella movement is because people were bored. They didn't know what to do with themselves, and it seems to be a natural human behavior to make stuff with your hands. And that's what these things happen. That's why I wouldn't look at it as a literati gathering. Literati knew what they were going to do when they came together, and they didn't do it out of boredom. I don't think so. But then, what is going to be more interesting is how the objects produced during the umbrella movement will be read and interpreted and collected from now on. We've heard that M+ is not really interested in collecting the stuff from the umbrella movement. I hope they will reconsider, because after all, if you call yourself a museum of visual culture, you shouldn't make too much decision based on so-called aesthetics, I believe. So I wonder what this will, Oscar is going to do this exhibition next month at JCCAC, and I wonder what will happen to these objects once the exhibition is
I mean, one difference to the literati is that there's a big audience. You know, like, I think the first time I really noticed this was with the Goddess of Democracy in Beijing in '89. You know, it's on such a large scale, partly because it has to read for the TV cameras that are there before Gorbachev's visit, you know, to circulate it around the world. And so when it's knocked down, you'll see it being knocked down, and that's also part of its meaning. And I think much of what was done visually during the umbrella movement was with a sense of it being a spectacle for electronic transmission, either through the news media, but also through your own, you know, Instagramming of or whatever that you're going to do with those images, dissemination yourselves.
And even in classical artistry, in the Renaissance, a lot of great artists, mainly those artists, they would produce things for processions in the street, religious processions, and also secular ones. So it's a different production that now you say, oh, this is very valuable. But in those days, it could have been under the umbrella.
I'd like to say something different, which is well, we're in a contemporary art fair, but we're not actually talking about, well, the umbrella movement is contemporary, but a lot of the other things we're talking about is not contemporary. But I'd just like to make this point that I don't believe in contemporary art as an analytical category. I think what's more interesting is all the art that exists now is, you know, now, that's fine. Contemporary, why focus just on the things that exist now that have been made recently? That's bizarre to me. I mean, something really old could be just as new in a way, and come from just a different mindset than something that's just been made, perhaps even more so, you know, something from a totally different cultural context or another time. So I'd like to kind of, I mean, a lot of my writing, I break down the distinction between the distinction between modern and contemporary. Because I see continuities, or I think it makes more sense to put all in one frame. So it's always strange at a place like Art Basel where, you know, what's happened or what's been made in the last few years is seen in a kind of vacuum from earlier history.
Well, there's some art fairs, especially art fairs of antiquities, now tend to bring in modern contemporary art. Breaking this barrier to give different meaning to things in the fair. But of course, I suppose it also has to do with economics. If you break a barrier, does it make the item more valuable or less? If it makes it less valuable, I'm sure fair operators will be very much less reluctant to do it. But what you were saying on another level is very important. Is how do we bring things to life? Which have seen the time and now being museumized, and how do we bring it back to life again? So it is in a way how to give back to things, especially these art things, a life or a value that is due to itself. But what we have to say on the users of
I would say that you know, I'm very much like Clarke, Gustavo Zizek, Rita, so I'm more interested in the antique and the fact that there is nothing there with an artwork but what the culture and people bring to it. Like in French call it the Spanish inn. You know, you bring to the inn what you're going to eat, and it's keep thinking about the aura. Walter Benjamin and so on, that thinking that the artwork has an aura, that it has something in there that pertains to itself, is I think a complete misreading. We build the aura of the artwork, and that also made me think of what you talked about, you know, looking at artworks in the garden of the literati, and that the painting of the literati, which is not something made for display, something you keep in a box, and come out and take out from time to time. And, you know, Benjamin had very interesting stuff to say about, you know, the cult value and the cultural value of artworks. So I don't understand the idea that, you know, there is something intrinsic in the artwork that pertains to it and is sort of stable. I don't think it's true at all.
No, I totally agree with you, which is why proposals of three parallel art was really trying to understand how an institutional framework allows things to appear or give definition of things, and also it makes it possible for people to make things for that particular framework.
I think it's really a distinctive thing about Chinese artistic modernity that it has this inner heterogeneity of ways of making art, not just style, something it's more than just stylistic diversity, but it's a whole mindset, as you say, to some extent, different contexts. But even like in the Maoist period, there was Hong Kong and there was Taiwan, there was outside those worlds. So the heterogeneity is, has many dimensions.
We did have 5 minutes. Would anybody like to ask any questions or bring up some points of discussion? Question.
You were talking about the aura of artwork and how we produce those auras. And I'm just wondering a related question on the aura of art history. Because I have seen a lot of older works emerging, like I've seen some of them showing up in the art fair. In terms of contemporary Chinese art, the works produced in late 1970s, the Start movement, or the works related to 85 New Wave. And you don't see them that often in China, so it's quite refreshing to see them in the art fair. And when I listen to the gallery's conversation with the potential buyers, and there's always this emphasis on how this work is so important in this historical context, and this work have been catalyzed, and look at these books, and look at these catalogs, and a lot of works, I think, without the social context, the work itself has kind of like low artistic value, but if you put them into that context, it becomes historically important. So I'm just wondering, like Chang-Tsong-zung as a scholar and important galleries, you also produce writings and participated in the making of Chinese art history. So I'm just wondering this kind of I don't know if I should use the word tension or definitely interaction or feeding into each other of participating in art history, making art history through exhibition and writing, and then operating a gallery in the marketplace.
History is always being edited and rewritten as time goes on. And in a way, when we say, we tend to look at it as an objective force, but in fact, a lot can continue, because one actor decides that his view is interesting, and his view managed to influence more people than others, and it becomes more established. And of course, there's some perspectives that are more successful in explaining the situation. But certainly, art as something which is value depends very much on this context. By institutional framework we were just talking about, includes the history, how it was canonized, how certain trends that line as representative of the age. And perhaps one of the things that artworks, as we call them, do is that they delineate for us the form of the time. And as historical items, whether something delineates the form, the spirit of the time successfully, they become more important in the long run. But then, of course, that understanding of the time also negotiable changes. So it is a precarious affair. You have two professional historians as well.
I would say, you're always interpreting art in relation to a context, but then the question that, to me, the key would be, if you have that, bring that contextual information to understanding a work of art, does it actually change the way you look at it, or is it just some background? You know, like if you say, when the artist painted this painting, he was wearing a green tie, you know, okay, that's contextual information, but it won't change the way you look at the painting. But say a Monet painting he painted in 1889, 1890 of ice on a river. Maybe if you bring the contextual information, well, that was just a few months after his wife had died. Actually,
the fair is now closing. Thank you for visiting Art Basel.
You may see the painting in a different way. You may see it as
今年嘅巴塞爾藝術展已經完結，
expressing
多謝
his
你
feelings
參觀。
about subjective emotions, you know.
The fair is now closing.
You just bring
Thank
the
you for visiting
information.
Art Basel.
You just bring the information that actually that was one of the really coldest winters in French history for 50 years or something. That brings you the information that those ice flows are pretty unusual. It's not something that happens every winter. Maybe you see the image in a different way. So if context actually transforms your experience, then it's relevant. You know, that's a criteria of relevance for it. And I think we always need more than one context. You know, like the title of the book is 3 Parallel Art Worlds. Well, I think we need many different perspectives in art history. I'm very wary about sort of grand theories that will explain everything. I think what we need at the moment is more of a fragmentation, looking at art from different perspectives, including geographical perspectives. You know, like I'm interested in what we can see from a Hong Kong perspective, you know. And those different perspectives need to talk to each other, talk across their blind spots, if you like.
No, sorry, yes. I'm not sure there's anything in the art world again that comes out of it, if that's what you meant. I'm not exactly sure. And you know, I was thinking, I'm very interested in the institutional history of art, and the fact that Michelangelo is Michelangelo not because he's made the Sistine Chapel, but because he became a part of a canon established by the Academy, the first Academy in the 17th century, and later on was picked up by early 20th century art history. You know, well, late 19th century, I should say. Art history itself created the idea of art that we still struggle with today, in fact. So you know, artworks can be invisible as long as the institution doesn't pick it up and make it into a spectacle, in a sense. So yes, but that's why I think I tend to struggle with the idea that I am an art historian. I don't think I don't think you are either.
Oh, okay.
By the way, it is a compliment. Okay.
Hey, we need another hour. You know, how can we? I think it's just starting to get interesting.
But yeah, that's a very interesting question, and also that the historicization. Can I say that? Historicization of the last 20 to 30 years of Chinese art is very interesting because it came very quickly, and it's been institutionalized by art fairs and commercial galleries who usually use that narrative to sell the work, basically. And we are stuck with this now. And that's why I was also interested in your choice, you know, you and your community, these three sort of well, they're not separate, but they can be looked at separately. And then there's no, as you said, there's no grand narrative. It gets reconstituted, reshaped, reformulated all the time, in fact. But there are some things that we are stuck with. Yes. You know, I teach, as Johnson was saying, my domain is also Chinese art. It always was, right? But I was, because of my face, I suppose, I'm supposed to teach Western art also to my students at Chinese University. And the way I teach Western art is usually the same sequence of, you know, Baroque, Rococo, and Romantic, and so on. Although I do struggle with it all the time. But if I don't do this, it confuses the students so much that it becomes useless. So I'm sort of forced into these old institutional choices in creating these sequences of events. And when I realized that when I teach 20th century Chinese art, I do the same. And it is problematic, but that's what education requires.
But could we teach it in a way that doesn't put those two things in separate boxes, separate courses, you know, that we just look at the field of art history as a whole? Because I'm very interested in those figures that cross those boundaries, you know, and don't, you know, their story is a global story.
The fair is now closing. Thank you for visiting Art Basel. Please make your way to the exit.
Actually, this is very
呢個巴塞爾藝術展已經完結，多謝你哋臨參觀，請按照指示離開會場。
I think it's possible,
The fair is now
but it
closing.
needs
Thank you
time,
for visiting
and
Art
that's
Basel.
difficult.
Please
We
make your
don't
way
have the
to the
time
exit.
to explore new ways of
咁呢
teaching
個巴塞
art
爾
and
藝
its
術展已
history.
經
In
完
fact,
結，多謝你
generally
哋
we
參
stop
觀，
with
請按
that.
照指示離開會場。
We're having experience of contemporary, because the contemporary needs to be together with art. Well, I think it's very, very enlightening what we used to artists, art historians, theoreticians. Certainly, I think we don't agree for decades we've been talking about how we should jettison this media history of things one thing after another. And certainly we have examples of things that happen that should be looked at, different frameworks that happen simultaneously at the same time and which can be compared. So we have been thinking about China for the Clarke Olympic, but also Hong Kong is part of the story, so I'm glad that this has been brought up and to put this conversation in context of where we are. And we're not only contemporary, we have our feet on the ground as well. Thank you all very much for being here and
Thank you.
for staying beyond the time. Thank you.